The sound of silence in a television studio is different from any other silence in the world. It's heavy with possibility, thick with emotion. On this particular Wednesday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta, that silence would change everything Steve Harvey thought he knew about his job and the power of showing up when someone needs you most. The Williams family had arrived that morning, looking like any other excited family. David Williams, 38, a construction worker with calloused hands and a warm smile. His wife Sarah, 35, a nurse at Atlanta General Hospital. Their three children, Michael, 17, Jessica, 14, and Emma, 10, the youngest, with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin that could light up any room. But what nobody knew was that just 14 days earlier, the Williams family had lost everything in a house fire. The fire had started in their electrical panel at 3:47 a.m. By the time the smoke detectors woke them, flames were crawling up the walls of their home in Decatur. They'd escaped with nothing but the clothes they were sleeping in and each other. Everything was gone. Photographs, Emma's stuffed animals, Jessica's trophies, Sarah's grandmother's jewelry, David's inherited tools, all reduced to ash. The Family Feud appearance had been scheduled months before the fire. When the fire happened, Sarah called to cancel, but the producers insisted they come. Sometimes people need something to look forward to, the casting director had said. So here they were, wearing donated clothes, trying to smile for cameras, hoping that winning $20,000 might help them rebuild. Steve noticed something different about the Williams family. During introductions, there was a heaviness about them. Emma was quieter than most 10-year-olds. When Steve knelt down to talk to her, she'd looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold secrets too big for someone so small. "What do you want to be when you grow up, Emma?" Steve had asked. Emma paused, looking at her parents, then back at Steve. "I want to help families who lose their homes. I want to help them find somewhere safe to sleep." The game started normally. The Williams family faced the Rodriguez family from Miami. David scored big with Pray for things people do when they're nervous. Sarah got points with Love for things you might find in a kitchen. But during the fourth round, when the category was Things That Make a House Feel Like Home, everything changed. Emma was at the podium. Steve had called on her with his usual enthusiasm. "Emma, we need a good answer here, sweetheart. Survey says, name something that makes a house feel like home." Emma had stepped forward to the microphone, her small hands gripping the podium. The studio lights caught the worn fabric of her donated dress, a pink sundress that was slightly too big for her small frame. She'd stared at the question on the board for what felt like an eternity. The audience waited. Steve waited. The Rodriguez family watched with anticipation. The studio seemed to hold its breath. Then Emma had spoken, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough for the microphones to pick up every word. Having somewhere safe to sleep with the people you love. The answer wasn't on the board. Steve had smiled gently and prepared to move on to the next family member with his usual grace. "Good answer, Emma, but let's see if it's up there," survey says. The board had buzzed and shown an X. Strike one for the Williams family. But Emma hadn't moved from the podium. She was staring at something beyond the cameras, beyond the studio lights, beyond everything visible in that room. Her small hands were trembling against the podium. "Emma," Steve had said gently, stepping closer. "You okay, sweetheart?" That's when Emma had looked directly at Steve Harvey, tears beginning to pool in her eyes like tiny storms gathering strength, and said the words that would stop the show, break protocol, and change everyone in that studio forever. "Mr. Steve, we don't have a house anymore." The studio fell silent, not the polite quiet of a pause between questions, but the kind of silence that happens when something real breaks through the manufactured world of television. Steve's smile faded as he looked down at this 10-year-old girl who was clearly carrying something much heavier than anyone her age should have to bear. "What do you mean, baby?" Steve asked softly, his voice stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. Emma's composure cracked completely. The tears that had been threatening spilled over as she looked up at Steve with the kind of desperation that comes from holding a secret too big for small shoulders. "Our house burned down," she whispered, but in that silent studio, every word carried like thunder. "2 weeks ago, everything's gone. All my stuffed animals, all my books, everything. We're sleeping at the church now because we don't have anywhere else to go." The camera operators kept filming, but by now, everyone in the studio understood that they were witnessing something far more important than a game show. The audience began to murmur, sounds of shock and sympathy rippling through the crowd. The Rodriguez family, still standing at their podium, watched with growing concern and compassion. But Steve Harvey, the man who had hosted thousands of hours of television, who had faced every possible situation a game show could throw at him, found himself in completely uncharted territory. He looked at Emma, then at her family standing behind her, and saw the truth written in their faces, the forced smiles, the donated clothes, the way they held themselves like people trying to be strong when they felt anything but strong. "David," Steve said, his voice carrying across the studio as he addressed Emma's father directly. "Is this true?" David Williams stepped forward from the family podium, his strong shoulders sagging with the weight of everything he'd been trying to carry alone. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "House fire. Lost everything. We almost didn't come today." But he looked at his children, at his wife, at Emma still standing at the podium with tears streaming down her face. "But we thought maybe we could win something, you know? Maybe we could get enough money to start over." Steve Harvey had been in television for 40 years. He'd seen heartbreak, triumph, surprise, and every emotion the human heart could produce. But standing there in that studio, looking at a family who had lost everything but still showed up to try to build something new, he felt something shift inside him. He turned to the production booth and did something that no game show host in television history had ever done. "Stop the game," he announced, his voice carrying with absolute authority across the studio. "Stop everything." The theme music cut out. The cameras kept rolling, but the show, as a show, had stopped. Steve walked away from his host position and stepped directly into the space between both family podiums. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve said, addressing the studio audience directly, "we're going to do something different today. This isn't about Family Feud anymore. This is about family, real family. And what we do when family is in trouble." He walked back to Emma, who was still standing at the podium, looking small and vulnerable under the bright studio lights. Steve knelt down in front of her, his expensive suit touching the studio floor, and looked directly into her eyes. "Emma," he said softly, "I want you to listen to me very carefully, okay? You don't have to be strong anymore. You don't have to pretend everything is okay, because right now, right here, you're safe. And your family is safe. And we're going to make sure that you have somewhere to call home." The words hung in the air like a promise. Emma looked at Steve with wonder and hope beginning to replace the despair in her eyes. But Steve wasn't finished. He stood up and turned to address the entire studio. 14 days ago, Steve announced, his voice strong and clear, the Williams family lost their home in a fire. They're here today not because they wanted to be on television, but because they're trying to rebuild their lives. They came here hoping to win $20,000. But you know what? We're going to do better than that. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal phone. Right there on stage, in front of cameras broadcasting to millions, Steve Harvey made a call. "This is Steve Harvey," he said into the phone, loud enough for the studio to hear. "I need to speak to someone about emergency housing assistance for a family. Yes, right now. A family of 5 who lost their home in a fire. I'll personally guarantee whatever they need." The audience erupted in applause, but Steve held up his hand for silence. He wasn't done. "Emma," he said, walking back to her and placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Remember what you said about wanting to help families who lose their homes, about wanting to help them find somewhere safe to sleep?" Emma nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Well, guess what, baby girl? Today you're going to learn something important. Sometimes when we help others, the universe finds a way to help us too. And sometimes," Steve's voice grew louder, addressing the entire studio again, "sometimes a television studio full of people becomes exactly the family someone needs." What happened next was pure magic. Steve removed his suit jacket, the navy blue jacket he wore for every taping, and wrapped it around Emma's small shoulders, just as he had done in that other studio, in another story, for another child who needed protection. "This jacket," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "has been with me for every family feud I've ever hosted. It's seen families win and lose, laugh and cry, come together, and sometimes fall apart. But today it's going home with someone who's going to remind me every day why I do this job." Emma was completely wrapped in Steve's oversized jacket, looking even smaller, but somehow stronger. The audience was openly crying now, moved by the raw authenticity of the moment. But the real magic was still to come. Steve turned to the Rodriguez family, who had been standing at their podium watching this unfold, with tears in their own eyes. "Rodriguez family," Steve called out, "I have a question for you. Would you be willing to give up your chance to compete today so that we can focus on helping this family?" Carlos Rodriguez, the father of the competing family, didn't hesitate for even a second. He left his podium and walked across the stage to where the Williams family stood. "Steve," Carlos said, his voice carrying across the silent studio, "my family came here to win money, but the Williams family came here to survive. There's no contest." He extended his hand to David Williams, and when David took it, Carlos pulled him into a hug that transcended competition, transcended television, transcended everything except human compassion. "We're going to help you rebuild," Carlos said to David, loud enough for everyone to hear. "All of us, everyone in this studio, everyone watching at home. We're going to make sure your family has a home." The studio erupted again, but this time it wasn't applause. It was something deeper, something that connected everyone in that room to their own experiences of loss, of community, of the kind of love that shows up when you need it most. Steve Harvey, watching this unfold, felt something he'd never experienced in 40 years of television. He was witnessing the moment when entertainment became ministry, when a game show became a community, when strangers became family. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity, "what you're seeing right now, this is what America looks like when we remember who we are. This is what happens when we stop competing against each other and start caring for each other." He walked back to Emma, who was still wearing his jacket like a shield of protection. "Emma," Steve said, kneeling down one more time, "I want you to remember this day, not because of what you lost, but because of what you found. You found out that you're not alone. You found out that love shows up in the most unexpected places, and you found out that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding something better." The cameras captured every moment, every tear, every hug, every word, but what they couldn't capture was the transformation happening in that studio. The Williams family wasn't just receiving help, they were receiving hope. The Rodriguez family wasn't just giving up a game, they were gaining something much more valuable. And Steve Harvey wasn't just hosting a show, he was facilitating a miracle. Behind the scenes, the producers were already working. Phone calls were being made to local contractors, to furniture stores, to the American Red Cross. The episode wouldn't just document this moment, it would become the catalyst for something much bigger. As the taping finally ended and the audience began to file out, something unprecedented happened. People didn't leave. They stayed. They approached the Williams family not as fans meeting contestants, but as neighbors meeting neighbors. Business cards were exchanged, phone numbers were shared, offers of help, of work, of support, of friendship. The Rodriguez family gathered around the Williams children, exchanging contact information, making plans to stay in touch. "You're not starting over alone," Carlos told David. "You've got family now, family you never knew you had." 3 months later, the episode aired with unprecedented response. The show received over 500,000 messages from viewers wanting to help. A construction company offered to build them a new home at cost. A furniture store donated everything they needed. Emma started a nonprofit called Safe Sleep, helping families who lost their homes. The jacket became her symbol of hope, worn to school, church events, and when receiving the mayor's Youth Leadership Award, Steve learned that his job wasn't to run a game show, but to create space for human beings to be authentic and support each other. The Williams house now has a plaque. "Home is where love lives, where memories are created, and where family is always welcome." Signed, the Harvey Rodriguez Williams family. Because that's what they became that day in the studio. Not three separate families, but one family connected by compassion, bound by love, and committed to showing the world what happens when we choose to see each other's pain and respond with our whole hearts. Steve Harvey still hosts Family Feud, still makes people laugh, still creates moments of joy and surprise, but he also keeps a spare jacket in his dressing room, just in case someone needs protection. Just in case another Emma walks onto his stage, carrying a secret too heavy for small shoulders, needing nothing more than someone to listen, someone to care, someone to remind them that they are not alone. Because that's what love looks like, that's what courage sounds like. And that's what happens when a game show becomes a gateway to grace, when entertainment becomes ministry, and when a family that has lost everything discovers that they have gained something infinitely more valuable. Proof that love really can rebuild anything, even when it starts with just 3 words whispered in desperation: "We need help."